My name's Gordon Kenny. I live here in Springfield. I'm the 7th District Congressional Chairman. Mary, did I get that right? I think I said it right. Okay, we've been in a lot of meetings today. Also have the privilege of serving in our Central Committee and the State Committee. And I appreciate you guys coming down to Springfield for those of you that are visiting us. The purpose today is it's always hard to figure out what type of program to do to satisfy everybody, because I always laugh about how they say how diverse the Democrat Party is. And they may be diverse, but boy, we're a party of diversity of ideas. So it's to try and get us all to poll for the same ideas. And you're hearing one common theme, that we need to poll together, especially come election time. So I do have the privilege. What we did, because we have a short time period, because there's other functions to do, we had posted out on the website, on the MRP's website, where you could ask questions. So I have questions here that were sent. Candidly, some of them I didn't use, and there was all these funny, I'll read one of them here in a little bit. It was kind of a funny name, and I think it's a fictitious one, but we'll go to that. So we're going to ask those questions and have a general discussion. And then if you have another question, just fill out as where are the young ladies? There they are. They've got a note card filled out, and they'll hand it over here to Paul Nahon and Danette. So we're going to start with self-introductions of our panel, and we'll start off with the speaker down here and just work our way this way, if that's okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Jones. I'm the Speaker of your Missouri House, and it's great to be back before you again this year. We're competing with ice cream right now, so that's probably why the crowd's down a little bit, but people will probably wander down here. I'll just give you I'll just try to encapsulate very briefly what we're pursuing in the Missouri House this year, kind of give you an idea where we are on things.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Can we introduce everybody first?
Oh, I didn't know what you wanted me to do.
Well, we're going to do questions. We're going to.
Oh, okay.
That was the purpose.
I'm Tim Jones, and I'm your speaker. Good to be here.
So how you like getting gavelled down, huh? Do you like that? I just get.
I need to be told what to do.
Yeah, that's fine. So, and really, what I'd like you to do, ma'am, is what committees you are on, if you're chair of a committee or things like that, and where you're from, and then we'll just go down, and then we're going to. And I probably didn't explain well enough. We're going to actually field questions that we've received, okay?
Hi, I'm Sue Allen. I represent the 100th District, which is West County, St. Louis. I chair the Appropriations Committee, our Speaker's Appropriations Committee on Health and Senior Services, Mental Health, Department of Mental Health, and Social Services. I'm also on Professional Licensing, and I typically call it refereeing, but it's actually License and Professional Registration Committee. And I'm on the House budget. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Well, we know he's a speaker.
All right. I'm Representative Denny Hoskins. I represent the 54th District, which is parts of Johnson and Pettis counties. I'm also the Speaker Pro Tem of the Missouri State House of Representatives, and I'm an ad hoc member of all committees. And my other job in what the real world is, I'm a certified public accountant and do a lot of government and not-for-profit audits. Glad to be here.
Hi, I'm Representative Sandy Crawford. I am from Dallas County. I represent Dallas County and parts of Laclede. I live about 30 miles north of here, and I also serve as the Majority Whip. I am on the Financial Institutions and Ag Policy Committees, and also as Majority Whip, I'm an ex officio member of all committees of the House, and it's great to be here.
I'm Senator Kurt Schaefer. I'm the senator from the 19th Senate District, which is all of Boone County and all of Cooper County, and I'm the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Dixon. I represent District 30, which is Springfield and part of Western Greene County. Let's see. I serve on the Financial Institutions, Professional Registrations, and Elections Committee. I'm the vice chair of the Committee on Economic Development, Small Business, and Local Government. I serve on the Transportation Committee, and I also chair the Senate Judiciary Committee, first non-attorney since the 1830s. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mike Kehoe. I am from Jefferson City, Missouri. I am a senator from the 6th Senatorial District, which is the center of the state. I have Miller, Morgan, Montauk, Cole, Gasconade, Osage, and Marys County. I've been in the Senate. This is my 4th year. I am the chairman of your Transportation Committee, and then I also serve on Energy and Commerce as well as the Appropriations Committee. Pleasure to be here.
I get to sit on the Senate side. My name is John Deal. I'm the representative from the 89th District, which is a central part of St. Louis County. I am also the House Majority Floor Leader, and I chair the House Ethics Committee.
Thank you all. I want to give you an example of one of the questions we received online. It's from Mortimer Brown, fake email address at gmail.com, and it says, "How does you all stay so fixed and sexy while in session?" Whatever. I don't think that's a real question. So we had
I
a-
work out and try not to eat.
No, they said
very much.
fixed, not fit. So that's, that came through the email. We're going to go through the questions that are here, and again, if there's a topic, get it over to the folks sitting over there, and they'll get it to us. This is, why isn't anybody in government doing anything to help shut down our out-of-control EPA? And I know a lot of the questions dealt with stuff that the feds are doing to us, okay? And there's limits you can do. But if anybody would like to touch that, or your thoughts on it, or things that you can do, we'd appreciate it.
I'm happy to take that.
Jump in. And all of you can answer.
Yeah, I mean, basically, most environmental regulations come from federal law, and when those federal laws, like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, were passed in the 1970s, they were a compromise because the federal government wanted to have a standard, some kind of national standard, but the states, the congressmen and women and the senators from the states who were there in D.C. were never going to go along with that. So there was a compromise as part of all that federal legislation, and that was that the feds would set a standard, the states then could implement programs to carry it out, and at least had to be as strict as the feds. And there's that, the catch right there is at least as strict as the feds. And so that's why when EPA ratchets up environmental requirements, the state of Missouri is required to do it. Now, on some of those, we've chosen not to do that, and the way those federal laws work, it allows EPA to step back in and take over those programs. And so what you get into is the feds are going to dictate that because that's what the federal law says, and until we change it, that's going to be a problem. But also, you know, you're better off dealing with the state than you are with the federal government, I believe, on every single issue. So it's a question of how do we keep that balance. But as a chairman of appropriations, the environmental regulations are no different than the education regulations and everything else, and that is the money is tied to it, and the feds say, if we're going to ratchet something up, you're going to do it, and either we're going to step in or we're just going to cut off the money. And we deal with this on everything. So that's the short answer.
Anybody else want to give a thought? Tim?
Yeah, two things in the House that we're doing. Well, number one, when you're dealing with the federal government and you're a state, one thing you have to do is you have to be clever, where you can. We work very closely with many of the industry heads here in our state who work with our God-given natural resources, like coal, to try to make sure that we can continue to use that and that we don't have our plant shut down because of some new regulation that's popped out of Washington, D.C. So we're working very closely in the House this year with folks from organizations and companies like Peabody Coal. They think there's ways that we can do some things with some of the current statutory framework to try and protect Missouri and try to provide some alternatives there where we can maybe relinquish ourselves from some of those. So basically, it's difficult, it's complex, but you got to outsmart the federal government where you can. Secondly, we formed a committee this past week in the House, a bipartisan committee on federal and state regulatory overreach. When we travel the state, that's the thing we hear the most from families, farmers, and small business owners, that regulations are just killing job creation in this state. People have to hire people just to deal with the paperwork, and we're going to do all we can to ferret out those regulations, beat them back where we can, repeal them where we can, get rid of them where we can, and come up with Missouri solutions for Missouri problems.
Anyone else? Senator Dixon.
A couple of years ago, I introduced Senate Bill 469, and I was very pleased to reached out to then State Representative Jason Smith, who carried it in the House. We successfully passed that, and it was signed into law. It's the first time that it provides a regulatory review process for rules that are already on the books. There's over 10,000 pages, and I'm just talking state regs. We're not talking about laws. We're talking about regulations promulgated by agencies. Senator Schaefer talked about DNR, which obviously is where the EPA Connect is there. but for the first time, there will be a public comment period on a rolling basis. The whole process will repeat every 5 years for every agency in state government. So we can look at amending some of these things that are onerous and completely out of the logical sense of where government should be, and we have an ability to repeal some of those. So in the past, all we've had the public comment period on is when there's a new one being proposed. But we don't know what the real impact of those rules are going to be on small business owners and families and the average Missourian until they've been in place and they've affected them, or in some cases run them out of business. So now we will have the ability to go back and review that and say, this rule doesn't make any sense, we don't need it, let's get rid of it. So I'm pleased that that's done.
Anyone else? We have more topics we can go. Do you want to go ahead? I'm sorry.
I'll take 3 years ago, I passed the Big Government Get Off My Back Act. And while primarily it was a bill that passed out of both the House and the Senate, the governor did sign to help create jobs and help our small employers here in the state of Missouri, it did have a provision in there that said no new rules or regulations on our small businesses. So I'm glad that that is still in effect, and that's one of the things that I worked on. I know was supported by everyone up here.
Okay, we'll move on to another question. It's a hot topic. There's multiple sides and multiple issues to it. We actually had some protesters out on St. Louis Street this morning waving signs, and and we got this a couple different ways, so I kind of made it one question. And it's, what is your view on Medicaid expansion, the pluses and the minuses, because there are those to it? I know that's a hot one. I know it's a big budget item, but I think, you know, because we'd like to have an answer to take out to the public whenever we represent them as leaders in the party. Are you going to jump in on that? Thank you.
I will jump in on that.
Okay.
And I did not say earlier, I am a physical therapist, and I did work in Medicaid and many different types of programs for many years, many different settings. Currently, like I said, I do have the appropriations for health, mental health, and social services. Social services is made up, it's enormous, and the Social Services Department runs all the Medicaid programs. What Medicaid expansion would do is to bring on more people onto the Medicaid rolls. It would not help, first of all, it would not help individuals who have the physical, developmental, behavioral issues to deal with. It would help people who, and it's not even correct to say able-bodied, because people who are able-bodied have a lot of needs within that mental health spectrum. So I think it was in '09, and then a person said that it would be stupid or very wrong to expand a Medicaid program that is broken, and that happened to be Barack Obama at the beginning of the Medicaid expansion program. So what we believe is, first of all, you make Medicaid better, and actually Monday in our appropriations hearing, we will offer 4 types of Medicaid reform with the same cost. We're just going to be switching dollars from various areas to help in areas such as asthma and dental, which are enormous emergency room factors, rehabilitation, and then health homes for foster children. So we're doing reform within our current appropriations and budgeting process. And with what we're doing, we're looking for return on investment, both dollar-wise, so Medicaid can function better, and also with the human benefit, helping those who need the resources the most. We know that with states that have currently expanded, and I'll end and let somebody else take this off, but we know that states that have expanded already, there are no fewer uninsured people in the state. People go from their private insurance to get on the Medicaid rolls. So basically, it doesn't make sense at this point. Reform is happening. It can happen without expansion.
Do you want to say something?
Sure. You know, I represent Dallas and Laclede counties, and just from my counties, one of them is, neither one of them are, there's a lot of poverty in both counties, I guess I would say that. And I hear stories constantly from people in my district, and I will just reiterate one of them that I heard. I was talking to a paramedic in my district several months ago, and she said, the certain people work the system. And she told me a story about how one day they were called to a house to pick up a lady. She showed her card. She was going to the hospital here in Springfield. Her son rode along with her. The sole purpose of that ride to Springfield was so her son could do a drug deal in Springfield. They got a ride from Lebanon in an ambulance on our tax dollars. I am all for helping people that need help, but this system is riddled with fraud, and we have got to do something about it. And I, for one, am more for reforming a system that actually does work and helps people that need help.
Gordon. Thank you. And let me address the numbers, because I know all of us probably want to talk about the public policy and the fact that it's bad public policy, but let's talk about the numbers. So right now in the state of Missouri, on the current Medicaid program, because you have to look at that before you can talk about expansion, there are 900,000 Missourians who are on Medicaid, which means out of roughly a 6 million population, there's 900,000 people that for everything they need in their health care, it's paid for by somebody else. And the way that's paid for is for every dollar that is spent, the state has to put 40 cents from our general revenue, our Missouri tax revenue. We have to put 40 cents on the table, then we get 60 cents from the Fed. So it's roughly a 60-40 match on every dollar. Now, that population that currently exists, we spend over $3 billion right now of our discretionary general revenue, our tax money, to be in that Medicaid program for those 900,000 people. And we spend more on Medicaid in that line than we do on all of public education, K through 12 and higher ed. Now, if you want to know why K through 12, the funding formula is $640 million underfunded, and if you want to know why higher education is $300 million underfunded where it was in 2008, I'll tell you why. Because that line has expanded by $980 million in the last 5 years. That's just the growth, almost $1 billion of growth in the last 5 years on that population of 900,000. Expansion does nothing to change that exponential growth. It does nothing to change that program. Now, on top of that, what we would do, if we do Obamacare and do the expansion, we add between 300 and 400,000 more people on top of the 900. Now, that 60-40 match and that continuing growth on that 900, that doesn't change. But what the federal government says is an inducement, no different than a heroin dealer. Well, you know what? If you add those 300 to 400,000 people on your rolls for the first 3 years, we're down to 2 years now, they will pay 100%. Not of everybody. That doesn't change that 900,000. It's just the additional population of 300 to 400,000. And then what happens is it goes to a 90-10. And I can tell you right now, by 2019, if we were to expand, that dollar amount right now, starting in 2019, is $250 million extra dollars of general revenue just for our 10%. And that's every year. That will grow roughly at the same rate that expense in the 900,000 has grown. And that's simply more money that can come from nowhere but public education. Because within that pot of discretionary general revenue, almost all of that money goes to Medicaid already. It goes to public education. The next largest is prisons at about $800 million, and there's not much left over after that. So that's the issue. How are we going to pay for it? Here's the other big issue that everyone in this room needs to understand. And that is that expansion for Missouri, because you'll hear this argument, they say, well, other red states are going to do expansion. Why can't Missouri do expansion? Well, there's a reason for that. The states don't have a lot of discretion within their Medicaid programs on what they can and can't do, but one thing we do have discretion on is setting the eligibility threshold. And so You know, pregnant women is about 158% of the federal poverty level. Children are 300% of the federal poverty level. Those are high. But for a single able-bodied adult, it's about 22% of the federal poverty level. There's no doubt that is a low threshold. And so states are kind of all over the board on that. So what the Affordable Care Act says is everyone has to go to 133%. And so that's where you get the expansion of the 300,000 to 400,000 people, is raising that eligibility threshold. Now, along with just the cost of our 10%, here's the real insidious part about this, which nobody wants to discuss. Right now at that 60-40 match, where we pay 40 cents on the dollar and the feds give us the 60, we have one of the best reimbursement rates in the country. Because Illinois, for example, which is pretty much already at the threshold of 133%, has about a 50-50 match. And part of what the federal government is doing in the Affordable Care Act, they're trying to get all the states on parity, get them all on the same playing field, because then you can regulate them all the same. And what will happen when everyone expands to 133%, and you have Dick Durbin or somebody from Illinois say, well, you know what? Illinois is paying 50 cents on the dollar, and Missouri's only paying 40 cents on the dollar. We can't keep that up. That is one of the things they're trying to do. And when that happens, I can tell you right now, everyone is not going to a 60-40. We're probably going to go to at least a 50-50. And just that additional increase on the reimbursement will be over $1 billion, actually close to $2 billion for the state of Missouri. That would be devastating on our economy. Either you completely obliterate what we spend on public education, or you close all of our prisons and still don't have enough money, or you have a massive tax increase. None of those are going to happen here, and it's why we're not doing it.
You can tell he's the budget chair because he's kind of got those figures down.
Not the numbers.
John?
Yeah, the Senator Schaefer is exactly right on the numbers, and kind of touched on some messaging themes, you know, because we do kind of tend to lose the public relations battle on this a little bit. And what we try to message is really pretty simple, is that the Missouri state budget is finite. Okay, we can't print money like the federal government. We can't borrow money like the federal government, and we're not going to raise taxes. So when you look at our budget, roughly 1/3 of that budget goes to elementary and secondary education. Approximately 1/3 of the budget goes to social services, and approximately 1/3 of the budget goes to everything else, which is higher ed, prisons, and everything else state government does. So when the numbers that Senator Schaefer talks about come true down the line, it's our obligation as stewards of public money to make sure that we don't kick the can down on the road. The easiest thing for us to do would be take the free money today, because it's the legislators 5 or 6 years down the line, they're going to have to deal with the mess. And when that bill comes, the only place that money can come from is education, which is our only constitutional duty under the state constitution to spend money and to fund. And it jeopardizes our ability to do that, and we'll have to raise taxes to meet our constitutional duties under our state budget. And that's why this can't happen. You can't do a long-term business deal with a partner who's bankrupt. So, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? We'll move on to a different topic, if that's okay. I saw Bill Phelps out there, and the question was asked, has the support for the Missouri Fair Tax waned, and do you hear much about it anymore? And then the second part to that is, where are we at on tax reform since a bill was passed and vetoed and all that? So kind of a two-part. Mr. Speaker, you want to start?
Sure. The fair tax is something I've always supported. I've co-sponsored the bills that have been filed in the past. I think it's ultimately where you need to go. You know, the problem is you're not going to unwind 50 years of Democratic taxation and spending that we had in the state before this current majority took over barely a decade ago. So you got to take it incrementally, and you got to start peeling back the layers of heavy-handed government. So I'm happy to report to you that this week your Missouri House voted out 2 tax reform, tax reduction bills with unanimous Republican support. So it's a positive step. We know that when you reduce taxation, you reduce barriers to growth and opportunity in the state, and so that's what we're doing. Those are the first 2 proposals. I think there's some more in the pipeline. Our goal is to do what we can to have a united front against a governor who wants to spend $1.2 billion new dollars of your taxpayer dollars this year. He wants to put it all into his pet projects and spend as much as possible. We're going to do as much as we can to send as much of that back to you as we can.
Senator.
I am happy to hear the House got both of those bills out. I know they've been working hard on it. Senator Kraus on our side of the building has been working on a bill as well. Everybody at this table shares the same concept, which is you can spend your money way better than any elected official ever will know how to do it. And so this is the beginning of the debate. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the governor to see things our way last year, but I believe the efforts put forward on tax policy this year, both by the House, who, as the Speaker has mentioned, has gotten their bills out, and by the products we're working on, I'm very optimistic it will result in some tax policy changes for all Missourians as we move forward by the end of session.
Anyone else? Okay. I'm just trying to give you a flavor of the questions, and this is one we got. Why do some Republican leadership support Common Core? And the second part was, and red light cameras. So how those two come together, I don't know, but Common Core and red light cameras. So who's the brave soul that wants to even touch that? I don't know if anybody does. Okay, good. We have a brave one. Let's give him applause.
There's a lot of information out there about Common Core. Do I support the Common Core principles? No. Do I think that an idea that if someone from Kansas moved to Missouri, a fourth grader, or my son sitting there in the audience, fifth grade, if he was in school in Kansas and moved over to Missouri, are there certain things that should be taught? I believe in Missouri and Kansas. Yes, I do believe there. But the problem that I'm seeing with Common Core, in my understanding, is those standards are dropping, and from what Missouri's current standards are, and that's really concerning to me. So as we debate Common Core and vet this process, I think it's something that we're still looking at. And I know that Missourians Against Common Core had a big rally at the Capitol this past week, and I heard a lot from a lot of people at the Capitol about their concerns, and I hope to be able to vet those and alleviate those concerns by the end of the session.
Anyone else? Anybody got anything?
I mean, I'll take that.
Okay.
I mean, the issue with Common Core, I mean, one thing, in order to get federal education dollars, your state has to develop a state education plan, and it's what our State Board of Education does. They can do that without adopting Common Core. Now, they're choosing to adopt those standards. They don't have to do it, and there's some federal money tied to it. The problem that we face in the General Assembly is that we didn't find out until about a year and a half after the fact that the governor had made a commitment to take that education money and commit the state of Missouri to certain things on Common Core, which we are now trying to go back and not only unwind, but just even determine what is there. And so we're finding out that commitments were made on new testing procedures, buying testing equipment, all kinds of things, and it's intertwined in the state budget. So most people know, for the state budget, and if you include everything, including our general revenue, our state revenue, which is about $8.5 billion, if you include that and all the federal money, it's about $25.5 billion budget. And each one of those budget items, for everything we spend money on in a program in the state, has a line to it. And we go through all those lines, tens of thousands of pages of lines. The problem with DESE is they have buried everything related to Common Core throughout their budget. So it's not like you can go to one budget line and say, well, that's Common Core, and if we don't like it or we don't get a response, we're just going to cut it. You can't do that because it's buried all over the budget. We've had a very, very hard time with DESE and with its director trying to figure out where those pieces are. We're getting farther down the road. I will tell you, though, it's one of the issues that the governor is trying to make very, very difficult for us. And we will get to the bottom of it, but I just want everyone to know, and I really appreciate the pressure you're putting on, but it is a very, very difficult task to even find where it is, which is one reason that we really like hearing from people in the local community. And remember, I mean, people in the local community are concerned because part of Common Core is a loss of local control in education. And we need to hear where that is filtering through to your district and where that money's going, so we know where to look for that money. But again, I think we're doing everything we can. It's a very entrenched problem by the governor and DESE, but we will get to the bottom of it.
And we had a couple of questions on Common Core, and I think most of them, and representatives, that kind of give you an answer, because you had a good one, and I think you touched on it there. Nobody wants to touch the red lights, huh? Well, that's okay.
I'll tell you.
Oh, you will? Okay.
I failed to mention I'm in the car business. And in all the full disclosure, I got a ticket from a red light camera a couple of years ago, and boy, that really sent me in the wrong direction. So I'm a little bit biased, but I will tell you where it stands right now. There's somewhere under 80 red light cameras operating in the state of Missouri. Municipalities are the ones who put these in place, so there's a lot of debate on what government should be able to tell a municipality to do and not do. MoDOT adopted some standards for red light cameras about 3 years ago, that the intersections who could have them had to pass certain data as to traffic volumes, and it had to be a high incident of crash accidents at those locations. Since they have, multiple other things, by the way, since they have passed those, these municipalities across the state have added about 4 more, so it seems to have slowed it down a lot. There is legislation we just heard in our committee the other day that would allow a municipality to assess a fine if you were caught in violation at one of these intersections, but no points on your license. That's kind of a compromise position between the municipalities and a few elected folks. Not saying it represents everybody, but it's kind of where the conversation's going. There is another piece of legislation out there that says if the cameras stay in place, all of the fine money from those cameras should go to that municipality school district, so the monies would go to school districts instead of back into the municipality's general revenue coffers. So I believe it's one of those things that seems to have slowed with the additional regulations that have put onto it. Lawmakers in general are real sensitive, whether you're dealing about Common Core or municipalities or anything else, about having the state dictate what to do to those areas. They have their own elected officials, and I know many of us, including me, try to let those elected officials run their particular areas of the state. We're trying to provide some oversight that doesn't make it too onerous as drivers move forward with them. And that's kind of where what the update is on those cameras.
Okay, thank you. Another question that has come up, and some of these I think are our core GOP values. The individual wanted to know where each one of you stood on the panel, stood on the state law that was recently enacted or being looked at on the Second Amendment rights. And I can't remember if it passed the House and there was something. So would you want to start that off, Mr. Speaker?
I think probably referring to the Second Amendment Preservation Act.
Yeah.
We passed that out of the House last year, I believe, and we have another model again this year. I think it's a perfectly constitutional bill, and I think it simply reaffirms the right to keep and to bear arms, which, believe it or not, the Ninth Circuit in California affirmed last week, of all crazy places. So if California can reaffirm the right to keep and bear arms, I think Missouri surely can as well. So that's where we are.
Anybody else want to say anything on the right?
Yeah, I will. This past week, we passed out of the Senate my Senate Joint Resolution 36. Right now in the Missouri Constitution, Article 1, Section 23, that is your right to keep and bear arms under the Missouri Constitution, it's similar to the Second Amendment. It's actually in some ways a little bit stronger. And so what we did in the resolution we passed out this week was we added language to it to make it perfectly clear that it's an unalienable right, that it is the obligation of the state of Missouri to uphold that right, including defending against any infringements on that right. And then we added language that says specifically when courts review any infringement on that right in the state of Missouri, they must apply a review called strict scrutiny, which, if you follow the Second Amendment issues, and strict scrutiny is simply the highest level of constitutional review that you can get from a court. And if you look, including even the Ninth Circuit case that came out last week that the speaker mentioned, all the way to the Heller case, to McDonald, what you'll find is the courts have kind of been all over the board in what level of review they apply. And it's very, very important, because the level of review acknowledges how important the right is, and then given how important that right is, what the government can or cannot do. And so what you'll find is the courts are all over the board on rational basis review, which is very low, intermediate scrutiny, heightened scrutiny. What we did by putting that language into Article 1, Section 23 in that resolution is guarantee that whatever the facts are of a case that comes before a Missouri court, they must apply the highest standard in recognition that that is an enshrined and unalienable right. Now, we passed out of the Senate. I hope that passes out of the House quickly, and it will go on the ballot this November. And it's a great thing to have on the ballot. I think it'll be a great issue to protect our Second Amendment and Article 1, Section 23 rights. So I hope we can get that moving.
We're making our rounds, sir. Okay?
I want to thank Senator Schaefer and also Senator Richard, who's over there, for co-sponsoring that Senate joint resolution that the Senator was just talking about. I was very pleased to be able to push that through my committee as quickly as possible. We got it to the floor in record speed. It is excellent. It does a lot of wonderful things, which I'll not reiterate. Senator Schaefer explained that very well. As far as the other bill, most of you in the room are aware that I did vote against the bill. I believe it has some mechanical problems that I hope to see fixed in the House. That's all I'm going to say. I think we need to focus on the good things in the other bill.
I was happy to see both bills actually end up getting out of the Senate. I know the House is anxious to take action on these as well. I agree Senator Schaefer's resolution being on the November ballot is a great thing for conservatives to have there to bring our people a bread and butter issue out to the polls, and I look forward to that getting there and fully supporting it.
John?
Likewise, not a whole lot more to add. These bills always do very well in the Missouri House. I expect we'll get them to a vote on the floor as soon as we can get them on the calendar. I know Senator Schaefer has asked me to handle his resolution in the House, which I've agreed to do, so hopefully we'll be able to get that out quickly.
Anybody else want to jump in? I guess you can say you're for it or against it. That's what they want to hear, so.
I'll go next. I have a CCW myself. I supported the Second Amendment Preservation Act last year. I will do the same, and I will tell you one quick story to let you know how solid your Missouri House is on the issue. The first year I was elected, we were talking about security issues, and we can pack on the House floor. We're allowed to do that. And one of the ladies asked the Speaker of the House, what if something bad happened and someone started shooting? And he looked at her and he said, knowing the number of people that pack in this house, my suggestion to you, if that happens, is to duck.
It's a pretty good answer, I'd say.
I plan on supporting those Second Amendment bills when they come up on the House floor.
Last but not least, I do 100% support Second Amendment. I have my CCW. We are pretty much, in my opinion, feels like we're unprotected in the House, throughout the Capitol. And many people are there to protect us among our peers. So, and I know Springfield's probably a really good place to have your CCW too. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to another topic, the session that was in here just prior to this one was one deal on the right to work, and this question I think is important. It said, where are we at on making Missouri a right to work state? And you want to start where you're at in the House? Anybody wants to add in? We'll keep going.
We had several votes last year to prepare for having bills that actually dealt directly with the subject, and I'm very happy to report that many of those bills were approved in the House last year. I'm a co-sponsor of about 4 or 5 different right-to-work bills. You have a great delegate. Those of you from Southwest Missouri, you have a great delegation who has filed many different proposals to make Missouri a state of worker freedom and choice. If you look around the country, it's no longer an experiment. 24 states let their workers decide if they should be forced to join a union or not as part of a requirement of work itself, and they also let them determine whether they want to opt out of having some of their wages go towards political purposes, which they do not agree. When states like Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, can all give their workers the right to freedom and choice, I say, why not Missouri? I think we're way behind on this one. And as I've traveled the state far and wide and spoken to everything from small mom and pop manufacturers to CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, they tell me the same thing. It is their number one or number two top priority, because when they're looking at expanding and creating more jobs, they're looking at operations outside of the state. Many of these companies, large and small, are looking at buying facilities not in Missouri, in the South, in the Southwest, in the Southeast, where right to work, where worker freedom and choice reigns. Workers themselves are coming up with this decision on their own and seeing that these are the facts. These are the economic facts of growth and opportunity. Last week, of course, hopefully you all saw, the individual workers in the state of Tennessee had that choice made to them, and they chose worker freedom and choice and decided to keep more of their wages in their own pockets and make their employment decisions for themselves. The second item, again, California, I hate comparing us to California, we're behind, but there was a mayor's race in San Diego last week. The Republican won, and one of his biggest campaign items was working against the unions for worker freedom and choice. So we're going to quickly be left behind in the dust with 6 of our 8 bordering states having worker freedom and choice. Last year in the House, we passed prevailing wage reform for the first time ever in this state. We passed paycheck protection for the first time ever in this state. And we had an amendment on a bill relating to the Kansas City police officers who actually came to us and, because of a recent court decision, said, we want to keep the rights we have right now. We want right to work for our Kansas City Police Officers Association. We had a vote in the House. We passed that amendment. So your Missouri House is ready to give workers the freedom of choice and create more jobs here in the state of Missouri.
And this is kind of asking for my mic privilege, I guess. What are we going to get anything done or not? I think that's what the question really was. I mean, we know we're for it, but do we realistically see a path to get it to the voters or something like that?
No, we didn't really change numbers last year between last year and this year. So we have the votes to get the bills out of the House and over to the Senate.
Now that's on you senators. You anybody want to tackle right to work?
I agree with the speaker. As people come through the Capitol, we get, it's a very emotional issue for the rank and file union members, and they like to come visit us at the Capitol. And as the speaker said, is what I tell them, I mean, we can't be in a race to last. 24 other states have passed this, and at what point does it become acceptable? When there's 35 states, when there's 42 states, or 49? So it's a high priority for us as well, and I know the majority leader has said many times when that bill comes to us, we intend to take it up immediately in the Missouri Senate.
Anybody else? Okay, and Mr. Speaker, you kind of touched on it. They wanted to know, are you actively working on abolishing the prevailing wage law as it is now? Does that seem like a reality that can come about?
Well, like I said, last year we, for the first time ever in Missouri history, we pushed back against the prevailing wage laws, and we got a reform bill through that the governor actually let become law. And so, like I mentioned earlier, after 50 years of Democratic dominance, you have to get your incremental victories. We had that first bill. We have a more aggressive bill moving through the House this year. I am pushing it, and I'm going to bring it up to the floor, and if myself and the majority leader think we can move that through, we'll move that through as well. You gotta keep going back on these things because they didn't just show up overnight. So first step was made last year. The House and the Senate stood firm against the big labor interests who didn't want any reform. So we've made a good first step forward. More bills were filed this year, and we'll continue pushing on this issue.
Okay. Anybody else on the prevailing wage? All right. Question came up that the ACLU, boo, you hear boo out there, has or is going to file a suit against the Missouri Defense of Marriage Amendment. I don't know if that's proper wording or not. Do you all have any information on it, or does anybody want to speak to that up here as our legislative leaders? Say what?
I don't need to hog the mic. Someone else.
Okay.
I don't know anything about it, but I hope we raise the money to defend whatever it is that they're filing, and are very, I don't think we can count on the Attorney General to step in and do that, and that's why the position of Attorney General is very important in 2016. We need to get that office back as well as the office of Governor. But I suspect that if that is successful or starts moving through the court system, I think you can expect swift action in the General Assembly to try to undo whatever's done judicially.
Anyone else? Nope, okay. Another question came in. We talked some about this actually in the state committee meeting. What's being done to ensure that our statewide presidential primary is binding so as to avoid the expense of a meaningless election and the chaos of the caucuses? Where are you, brave souls? No, anybody? No one wants to touch that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Senator Dempsey and I, who's the Senate leader, and I discussed this week. I believe, let me think, they're going to do one bill, we're going to do the other. I think Senator Dempsey said that he's going to be moving a bill through the Senate that's going to reestablish Missouri as a primary state. We have to work with the RNC on the timing of that. And in the House, we're going to be working on a number of other election items, determining whether or not we should move up our August primary at all. We seem to have some real difficulty in properly reloading after the primary season and getting good candidates the funding they need, because that's a very compressed schedule. So I know there's several election bills filed in both the House and the Senate to address both the presidential primary issue and the statewide primary issue as well. So I think you'll see some clarification on those this year.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think it's really important for our statewide candidates running in 2016 that we move our primary up so our candidates have time to reload and reorganize after the primaries to take on the Democrats. And I think that's something we're going to try to do again. We got it really close to the finish line last year. I think there's going to be a renewed push to try to move the primaries from August to June, and also to move the presidential preference primary back until probably the middle of March.
I'll tell you what I'm more concerned about is the people that are in 4 districts, 3 House districts and 1 Senate district, that have absolutely no representation in the House and Senate right now, because the governor refused to follow the law and call a special election without delay. Jason Smith was elected to Congress. His people in that district have no one representing them in the House. The Senate passed 2 bills at the very beginning of session. I sponsored SJR 30, which once it goes through the House, it will go to you all to vote on at the ballot. And then the companion bill, Senate Bill 507, we're going to skip the governor and send it right to you for a vote. A statutory measure. He would be required to call that election within 30 days. No questions. He has to issue the writ. I just don't understand, what do you not understand, but what do you not get about without delay?
I know we're just reminded in the House, Representative Tony Duggar, who's sitting here in the front row, has a election bill that he's working on that would deal with the presidential primary election. So we are working on that in the House as well.
Anybody else? Okay. One thing I would like to do is ask a question. I think we all know what the answer is, but it's been repeated through here several times. It also deals with the federal supremacy, part of the U.S. Constitution, and it's just a basic question. Why can't something be done about Obamacare? And is there anything that the state can do?
I'll start, and I won't repeat all those numbers I gave you earlier, and if you had about 25 more minutes, I could give you a whole lot more relevant numbers. The issue is, we're seeing it right now. Last year, we passed a licensing bill because part of the Affordable Care Act for the exchanges is that you have these navigators. And navigators are basically just people that are put out there by organizations to sign people up. And not only do they take their personal information, their health information, and their financial information to help them choose a plan, but they also help determine how much subsidy they get on that plan. So what we did in the state of Missouri, and we passed that language, the voters in the state of Missouri said we didn't want to have any part of expansion, so we don't do that. So we have a federal exchange, but the insurance products on that exchange are Missouri insurance products. They're Blue Cross Blue Shield policies and other policies that can only be sold in the state of Missouri. So last year, we passed a bill that said, okay, if you're going to be a navigator and you're going to take this private information, then you have to be licensed by the state, no different than an insurance agent. Well, the federal court threw that out, the preliminary injunction, it's not final yet, but they said a couple weeks ago, we can't license that. So I filed a bill that said, all right, fine. If we can't license them, then here's what we'll do. If you use a navigator and that navigator uses your personal information for anything other than lawfully signing you up for insurance, you can sue them for $50,000. Now, I don't think there's any way a court can throw that out, but the licensing part, they threw out. And it shows you that while we have some ability to control some of this, what we are seeing right now from the federal government, the level of overreaching is unprecedented. And there's no better example than Obamacare. But we'll push back where we can, and hopefully we pass my bill and we'll see what happens, and if a court does something with it, then we'll have to look at something else. But keep in mind, those same navigators, and here's why I filed the bill. The Congressional Budget Office put out a report at the end of last year where Health and Human Services admitted there is no requirement to be a navigator other than you have to get online and take between 5 and 20 hours of training, and you can get online and take it as much as you want. There's no background check. There's no requirements to actually make sure people have any qualifications. There is nothing as admitted by Health and Human Services that prohibits somebody convicted of identity theft from being a navigator. I mean, that's patently absurd. So again, we'll keep doing what we can try and do. This really has to be changed in Congress. That's where it comes from. But it's why it's so critical, and I know everyone up here shares my view on this. We have to fight every day against this overreach. And until we start getting some cooperation in D.C., we take back the Senate and we get a Republican president, we're just going to have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. But for example, on Obamacare, we'll keep doing those things that we know protect Missouri citizens, whether the federal government cares or not, and we'll just have to respond to what the courts do with it.
Yes, ma'am.
And I have filed a bill to require a navigator functioning in Missouri to have a criminal background check and to have passed.
Anyone else want to add in? There is a quick question here, and I think this is an interesting one. Will anything be done with the multiple articles of impeachment against the governor?
Well, mainly those are, I think those have just been filed in the House, and we haven't had an impeachment in Missouri since the early 90s, I believe, so we had to dust off the books and get the dust off them and look at them. We, like we do with everything that's filed by every member, we refer those to a committee and have the committee chairs examine them and see if there's any merit moving forward. The thing we have to be wary about, though, is creating a political circus where we simply get attacked every single day in the media, not like we already do anyway, but in taking the eye off the ball of things like that are going to really change our state now and put our governor in a box, like reducing taxes, like making Missouri a state worker freedom for right to work, like doing significant medical malpractice reform. Our healthcare system is under attack right now by big plaintiffs' trial lawyers who are our doctors and nurses and med students are open to multi-million-dollar damages unlimited, like fixing our education system. The best thing we can do, and this kind of goes back to the Obamacare question too, we have thrown up more barriers to Obamacare than I can count anymore. The problem is the federal government doesn't stop, and they have a complicit accessory in the governor's mansion and in the attorney general's office. And so ultimately, I hope enough independents and moderates and maybe even some liberals have buyer's remorse about this last election, ultimately to fix all these problems that we deal with the courts, with Obamacare and all these things are at the ballot box. And I know you are all on this page with us and we're singing to the choir. We gotta get people, we gotta triple the size of people that are in this room right now to elect common sense conservatives in 14, 16 and beyond so we can take back our country and our state. That's ultimately where we win.
Senator?
rather than comment on the articles or the validity of the articles, since the way the process works is that the vote on the impeachment articles is in the House. The Senate, because it's the chief executive, would be charged with electing 7 eminent jurists to try the case, and that's where the sentencing takes place. Incidentally, there's only one outcome. Guilty, you lose your office. But in the process, what happens is the executive is removed from office while that's going on. I just want to comment that I find it interesting that one of those articles was about those elections that I just talked to you about, that they weren't called without delay. I'll just bet that if we ever got into that situation, the governor would want the Senate to elect 7 eminent jurists without delay.
Anyone else? How we'd like to kind of start the wrap up of the session is let's start with John Deal over here. What do you think is the most pressing issue for our state right now? And I hope, or why don't we, since we have 8 of you, maybe you can come up with the top 10 most pressing issues so nobody steals the thunder. You only get one.
Top 10 with 8 people.
Say what?
Top 10 with 8 people. Huh?
Well, I know. That gives you somebody, because somebody's
gets to do
somebody's
more than
going to
one.
grandstand twice. So.
That's probably true. I think it's reducing the barriers and regulatory burdens that we have on small businesses, allowing them to grow and to create more jobs, whether that be tax policy, labor policy, or regulatory paperwork burdens which are put on those businesses. Small businesses grow the economy. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy, and we need to do everything we can to make sure those types of businesses grow and prosper.
Senator?
After 35 years in small business, that's why I ran for office. I was aggravated. So I agree with Representative Deal on that. One thing we haven't touched about today, certainly we've touched on some important things, and I know some of my colleagues will expand on that, but transportation is a huge issue that I talk an awful lot about. I served several years under Governor Blunt's appointment on the Transportation Commission, oversaw a lot of projects all throughout the state before I ran for Senate. Our transportation funding is at a critical period. Gas tax revenues are going down every day as we speak. The federal government is not able to provide the funds that they take from our 18.4-cent gas tax that they get out of every gallon you buy and return it to us properly. So we are at a crossroads. We have 32,000 miles of hard surface highway, 10,400 bridges, and over 200 major river crossings. We cannot sustain that system with the funding that we have, and I am hoping that Missourians will be willing to help us figure out what that is by letting them vote on a solution that could come before you in November. If Missourians vote that down, I'm fine. I just want you to be the ones that decide how to fund the transportation system in our state, because there could be a time and day when we're not as fortunate with who the House and Senate leadership are that we have today, and another party could just shove this down your throat, and I don't want that to happen. I want you to be able to decide. It's a huge issue that we need to keep talking about. It's not easy to talk about, especially for conservatives, but it's one of those things that it's there, and we need to have it as part of our conversation.
I've given a great deal of thought about where we are right now, not just as a state, but as a country, where the country is. And when I was 6 years old, that's when I first got involved in the political process and sold Ronald Reagan bumper stickers door to door for what I paid for them. The country is really at the same kind of crossroads that we were in, or that we were at in 1979, 1980. I will say that I think we need a spiritual renewal in the country. That has nothing to do with government. Can you imagine what Congress would have done with the 10 Commandments? But I think we need a renewal of the American spirit, a renewal of the spirit of enterprise within the country. And so it begs the question, what should we be doing, but more importantly, what should we not be doing? And when I think about where we are, we're stagnant. The country is stagnant. We are bogged down. We are experiencing stagnation. And there are really three main barriers to growth, three main causes to that stagnation. It's over litigation, it's over taxation, and it's over regulation. We have got to remove the barriers and get out of the way. We've got to get out of the way. And everybody up here is working day and night. We're working day and night up there to find those things that we can get out of the way so the real people that create jobs, the small business people, can do it. The answer is not government. And I think we have a massive choice ahead of us. It's a crossroad choice for the country, and it's the same for the state. It mirrors that crossroad and that fork in the road that we took back in 1980, and I hope we get involved and do everything we can to push the country in the right direction.
Two things, and I agree with everything everyone else is saying, but two things particularly that I want to touch on. One is, as Chairman of Appropriations, delivering a balanced budget that is a budget within our means, that does not require a tax increase and allows for a tax cut to Missouri citizens. That's number one. And the related issue is pushing back against the federal government, not only on what they require us to spend of our own money in an ever-increasing manner, but the overreaching on every one of those issues that affects your fundamental rights. And we need to use every legal tool that we have. And for example, in the appropriations process last year, that's where we used the subpoena power of the committee. First time that subpoenas have been issued in the legislature in 20 years, since Jay Nixon did it when he was a senator in the early 1990s. And we subpoenaed the Department of Revenue and the federal agents who were getting your personal information and giving up the information on the concealed carry list. And by issuing those subpoenas and making those individuals come in front of that committee, we stopped that process. It's that kind of pushback that we've got to keep providing. That's what we'll do.
I'm going to go in a different direction. This is not something that we are talking about this year in the legislature, but it's something we passed last year, and that is the Right to Farm Amendment that's going on the November ballot. That is one of the most important things that we can vote on this year. The bottom line is you're going to hear a lot of pushback from animal rights type groups that think this is a bad thing, but where I would direct you is to groups like Protect the Harvest. Look and see where the big agriculture groups, Farm Bureau, cattlemen, pork producers, all the big agriculture groups in the state that feed us, by the way, look and see which side of this issue they're on. They're on the side to pass this legislation to give us the right to farm. How sad is it that we have to put this on the ballot? Very sad. But I just want to encourage you, I'll just put a little plug in for it. Please vote for the right to farm this November.
When you get down to about the seventh or eighth priority, I agree with everybody else's priorities as well. I was trying to think of something different. I know one of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet is the school transfer issue. We have some unaccredited schools, districts throughout the state, mainly in St. Louis. And what's happening is when you have one unaccredited school, in this instance the Normandy School District, what do? We've never had a school district go bankrupt before. 3 of the surrounding school districts that surround Normandy are provisionally accredited. If you blow up the Normandy School District and send all those unaccredited students to 3 provisionally accredited districts, what do you think is going to happen to them? They're going to be unaccredited as well. I know many times, and when I was out on the campaign trail, we just can't keep on throwing money at the big school districts, St. Louis and Kansas City. That doesn't work. They have the amount of money per pupil is more than we spend in a lot of our rural districts. So I think that's a situation that we're dealing with in the General Assembly this year, and one that we'll continue to monitor as we go forward.
I'm all about budget, and thank God for Senator Schaefer over there, and we have a great budget chair in the House. Within that budget, the impact of Medicaid, to me, Medicaid reform is crucial. We need outcomes-based mentality. We need accountability. But with all of this, we need to be knowing that this process respects and utilizes our limited resources in the state.
You know, I think everything we've heard here, as the last person, comes down to protecting and promoting life and liberty. Without those two things, you have nothing else. And because of some of the pieces of legislation that I was blessed to ask to handle over the last 7 years I've been in the legislature, on life, I'm very happy to report that we are really down to one functioning abortion facility in this entire state. And liberty. You know, this country was founded on two basic principles. Why did people come to the New World? Why did they flee the Old World? Well, basically on two principal concepts. They were seeking economic liberty and freedom, and they were seeking religious freedom. Those were really the two reasons they came here, because in the Old World, the feudal lords, the kings and queens, you were beholden to what they believed and what they wanted you to have. And when you came to this country, you could pursue whatever religious freedom you wanted, and you could enjoy the fruits of your labor by pursuing your happiness. And so I think I'll go back to what I first mentioned. When I was touring the state a few weeks ago, I heard the same thing from a small rural manufacturer, that third generation family that is involved in making plastics. I heard the same thing from them that I heard from the Fortune 100 CEO. You know, we're losing the battle for job creation and manufacturing in this state. Former manufacturing facilities are parking lots and empty fields now. And all of those jobs are going to our south, our southwest, and our southeast, states that allow workers the freedom of choice. We're surrounded by states nearly that allow those workers that opportunity. So if we really want to restore Missouri manufacturing, job creation, innovation, and technology, we have to make Missouri the 25th state for right to work in our union.
I'm acquainted with several of the folks up here, and honestly, they're great Americans, great Missourians. Really mean that.